And so our next lightning speaker today will be Ron Lencevičius. Hopefully I got that right. From the University of California, Santa Barbara. Ron is a PhD student in the Department of Statistics and Applied Probability, and Ron will be speaking today on container-driven reproducible research made simple. Let's welcome Ron.
So, hello everyone. Yeah, so my name is Ron. I'm a second-year PhD student, as it was already said. But yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about containers and how we can use them for reproducible research and, well, how to make it simple. So a little bit of backstory. This all started a little bit over a year ago when we kind of started working in our department to try to revamp the department compute server. It had a number of limitations. It was rather difficult for researchers to get the latest packages and just in general get up and running with things. So we sat down and kind of like listed out a list of requirements that would fit the new refreshed server. So for one thing, we wanted a high degree of flexibility in the software configurations that people and researchers in our department could use. We also wanted the researchers to have control over these configurations as much as possible. And lastly, we also wanted to make this as easy to use as possible, meaning we wanted to minimize as much messing around with terminal and trying to like configure your own software and whatnot. It just should work, and like you could start working on your research as soon as possible. So the solution that we kind of came up with was development containers with the Visual Studio Code text editor. So containers are basically a more lightweight version of virtualization compared to virtual machines, which require, or they end up, virtual machines end up emulating like part of the hardware and the software, whereas containers just deal with the software side of things for the most part. On top of that, containers are you're able to configure them down to the operating system level, so you have a lot of flexibility in the type of configurations that you can create. On top of that, you have isolation of different project dependencies, so each project that you might be working on is completely separated out. And it's also separated out amongst users, so users don't get to see, like, you know, if you have multiple users on one server, like, the users are separate, as are their projects, which is very nice. And lastly, Visual Studio Code provides a nice user interface for simple management of connecting to remote compute servers and also managing these project configurations. So in addition to that, development containers as a standard works very nicely with research, partly because it only requires 2 files for a full environment specification. We can kind of refer to it as configuration as code. And as a consequence of this, it's very easy to package these files up. You can see them down here. It's just the development dev container.json file and a Docker file. And with that, reproducibility is baked into the core of this, since you can version system packages, language packages, and you can also include tools that you were using to actually, you know, produce your research. However, not all is great, because writing container files can be a difficult process. It might require you to have a little bit of the knowledge of the system that you're trying to reproduce. However, we kind of got around this by creating an extendable template, which you can see down here. You answer just a couple of questions, and it builds a starter project for you with these files inside. And it provides you all those wonderful tools that a lot of us are probably familiar with for your research. So how does this all come together? So in general, with Visual Studio Code, you can connect to a remote host, some remote compute server. And once you're connected, you can go and open up your project files, as you see here. And inside, you have the actual dev container folder that contains the 2 files that I was talking about earlier, which are used to build the your software specification to actually, work on your research. Once this is built and you're inside your container, you can then either start editing within Visual Studio Code, or you have other options such as accessing Jupyter Lab and doing your work there, or you might even be able to, if you're coding primarily in R using Cordo, you can have access to RStudio Server and harness the power of your compute server, and on top of that, the flexibility and reproducibility of containers. So that's all I have. Right here is a link to the department, our computing wiki for the department. This is a work that I do with my advisor, Dr. Sang-Yoon Oh. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions for Ron?
Thank you for the great talk and the cool tool. I was wondering whether it's specialized to UCSB like system, or can I also use it as Stanford Sherlock server or something like that?
So at least our configuration is it's specific. It's somewhat specific to UCSB, but the nice thing is that, again, the template is rather flexible, and the parts that are kind of like more specific to UCSB's kind of like infrastructure, you can comment them out or just delete them. And the template itself is built so that you can kind of modify it yourself and whatnot to actually get things up and running. But the idea is that eventually we can make this something that like other people can use as a potential like framework. In fact, we're kind of like working on putting together like a paper to kind of like discuss like the uses of this and kind of how to implement it like in general practice. Thank you for your question.
Thanks for the talk. I'm trying to wrap my head around this idea of a container.
Yes.
Does it have anything to do with like just virtual environment, just having separate virtual environment for everything?
So it's a very similar concept. The thing with virtual environments is that they are more geared towards like your specific language tooling, especially with like Python virtual environments. This, on the other hand, is kind of like in the quote that Fernando like put up at the very like first slide. It's trying to reproduce an entire software environment, not just like for a specific language in particular. This is partly because like I've actually run into this issue myself. Like there was like, I don't know, there was some person's research that like I was trying to get to run on my laptop, and for like, I think it was like 3 weeks in undergrad, I was just toiling away. I was like, why isn't this working? Turns out the problem was Windows. And that was the final nail in the coffin for me to switch to Linux permanently. But that was like one of the issues. And like if I wanted to, like I could have built a container to, run like a bare bones Linux distribution with, the actual necessary things to run the research project. But literally I could not run it because of the operating system I was on, and a virtual environment wouldn't have necessarily helped with that. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Let's thank Ron once again.